It was a typical Thursday evening, with rain pouring relentlessly from the heavens, drenching the streets and creating an ominous rhythm against the roof. Sarah sat in her small two-story house, her only companion being the dim light of a desk lamp as she worked from home. The silence of the night, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder, seemed peaceful at first, a perfect setting for getting work done. She had gotten used to the solitude in her home, especially after the move into this old, somewhat eerie house on the edge of the neighborhood. The house had a charm that many would find inviting: wooden floors that creaked with each step, a wide staircase leading to an empty second floor, and a view of the dense woods from the back windows. Yet, despite the cozy atmosphere, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The building's age seemed to whisper secrets, its old walls likely echoing with stories of the past. As Sarah clicked through her emails, trying to focus on her tasks, a strange noise interrupted her concentration. It came from next door, the apartment she knew had been vacant for weeks. It was faint at first, the soft scraping of something across the floor. She paused, staring at the screen, unsure if she had imagined it. The noise continued, growing louder, as though something heavy was being dragged across the floor of the adjacent apartment. The sound was faint at first, almost a melody drifting through the walls. Sarah froze. The sound was eerie, like someone had purposefully chosen an old tune to hum. Her heart raced. The wind howled outside, but the whistling was too deliberate, too purposeful to be caused by the storm. Her eyes darted toward the windows, half expecting someone to be standing outside in the rain. But the darkness beyond the glass revealed nothing but the blurred silhouette of the trees. She slowly stood up again, her steps cautious as she approached the wall where the noise was coming from. Her pulse quickened. She could make out the faintest of shapes moving inside the vacant apartment next door, the whistling continuing, the melody growing more intense. She turned to glance at her phone, searching for any message from her landlord or real estate agent, but there was nothing. The sounds from next door continued, and she began to feel a creeping sense of dread. It wasn't just the noise. It was the silence that followed it, a silence that hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating her. The whistling grew louder. It wasn't coming from a radio or a distant speaker. It was right there, next to her, behind the wall. She could hear the exact pitch and rhythm of each note. Her mind raced as she tried to reason with herself. It could be anyone, she thought. Maybe the building wasn't as empty as she believed. But why would anyone be whistling so late at night? The thought of someone moving into the apartment next door made her feel slightly better. The building was old, and the landlord might have been showing the space to a potential tenant. But as Sarah began to relax, another sound jolted her out of her thoughts. A creaking floorboard. Someone's walking inside. Her hand clenched around the edge of her desk, her gaze locked on the dark corner of her room. She tried to focus on the screen in front of her, but all she could hear was the rising whistling and the occasional floorboard creaking from next door. Without thinking, Sarah bolted for the front door. She didn't even check to see if the figure had followed her. She didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting out of this house, away from the oppressive, suffocating atmosphere that had taken over her life in the past few hours. Her fingers fumbled with the lock. She turned the handle, but the door didn't budge. It was locked, but she hadn't locked it. She pulled harder, but the door remained stubbornly shut, as if something was holding it closed from the outside. She stepped back, panicking, then charged forward, slamming her shoulder against the door. The impact sent a shock of pain through her body, but it didn't open. The door felt as though it had been reinforced from the other side, and she realized with dawning horror that she wasn't going anywhere. The whispers began again, this time accompanied by a low, guttural laugh. Sarah spun around, her eyes wide with fear. The figure stood in the doorway, just beyond the threshold of the living room. It was taller now, its form shifting and changing as it moved closer. The whistling that once seemed distant now felt like it was right in her ears, vibrating through her skull. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah cried, her voice shaking. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it stepped forward, closer and closer until it was standing directly in front of her. The faint whistling continued, but now it was no longer just a song. It was a warning, a beckoning sound that seemed to draw Sarah in, like a siren's call. "No," Sarah whispered, stepping backward. "Please, no." The figure paused, as if it had heard her, its hand frozen in midair. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she took another step back, but this time she bumped into something, the door. Her pulse surged as she realized that the door had somehow unlocked. She didn't hesitate. She threw it open, the wind rushing in with a violent force, pushing her out onto the porch. Sarah didn't stop running. She didn't care where she was going. She just needed to escape, to get away from the nightmare that had taken over her life in the past few hours. The storm was still raging, but the rain felt different now. Colder, harsher, like it was trying to drown out the memory of what had happened. She ran down the steps and into the yard, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and the trees bent under the force of the storm. But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whistling had returned, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind. It was no longer coming from the house. It was coming from the woods, from deep within the trees. She stopped for a moment, her legs shaking, and looked back. There, at the edge of the yard, she saw it. The figure was standing in the doorway of her house, watching her. Sarah didn't stop running until she reached the nearby town. It was there, in the cold, early hours of the morning, that she finally found shelter. She collapsed on the steps of a diner, her chest heaving with exhaustion, the storm still raging around her. She tried to process what had happened, but every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the whistling. The voice, the figure, the shadows in the house, they were still there, haunting every thought. When the police arrived, they found no sign of anyone in Sarah's house. The doors were locked, the windows shut tight. Nothing seemed out of place. But Sarah knew the truth. She had felt the presence, seen the figure, heard the whispers, and deep down, she knew that she wasn't the first to experience it. The town had a history, a dark, twisted past, and now it seemed Sarah was part of it. As she looked back toward the direction of her house, she knew that the whistling would never stop. It would always be there, waiting for her to return.